Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Preparing Data for EUDAMED, a Virtual Panel. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments throughout the presentation for our speakers by using the questions chat box, and just letting you know to be aware that there will be no question and answer period during the presentation or after the presentation, as this is a lively fireside discussion with our panelists. So please send in your questions and the team will answer them after the webinar. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank ReadTech, who developed the content for this presentation. ReadTech is the provider of best-in-class information-based solutions and services to meet the needs of the life sciences industry, government agencies, and the intellectual property market. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your speakers for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to introduce you to Angela Alexandro. She's going to be your moderator for today's event. And Angela leads marketing for ReadTech Life Sciences, working closely with ReadTech subject matter experts, product leaders, as well as the sales organization. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Gary Sainer. He's a Senior Manager of Information Solutions at ReadTech. He is a subject matter expert on pharmaceutical structured product, labeling, and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. Next, I'd like to introduce you to John Lawrence. He's a Director of Product Management, Medical Devices. And there he is. With ReadTech, John directs electronic submission and regulatory initiatives that impact the medical device industry. And next is Mark Wisemuth. He is the CEO of GMDN Agency. The agency is responsible for maintaining and delivering the global medical device nomenclature to users in over 170 countries. And Mark has been to every continent promoting the adoption and use of the GMDN to support medical device regulation as a global harmonized system of device naming. And next we have Tom Risch. Tom Risch is a medical device guru at Greenlight Guru, who works with the customers to utilize their QMS software to build safer products on expedited timelines. He is a biomedical engineer who began his career developing implant and instrument systems in the orthopedic industry. And next we have Aaron Salbilla. Aaron is the Director of Quality System at Vyaire Medical. Aaron is an experienced QRA director with a demonstrated history of working in the medical device industry. She is skilled in quality system compliance, harmonization and remediation, medical device labeling, global UDI requirements and compliance, EUDAMED and EU MDR compliance. Those are your panelists there, and now I'm going to pass over the controls and mic to Angela. So Angela, when you're ready, you can begin the fireside discussion with our panelists.
Thanks, Sonia. Welcome everyone from wherever you're calling from. We are so grateful to have our friends and colleagues around today as we walk through some of the top frequently asked questions posed from regulatory teams. We'll talk a bit about how to get prepared for EUDAMED submission, some of the latest guidance and what we're hearing, talk about QMS systems and what should be considered there, and also some experience with audits and just preparing data overall, workflow adjustments that are needed for compliance. With that, I'm going to launch right into the first question. And the first question is, the latest information that we have is that EUDAMED, UDI, and device registration module is open. So what's the current recommendation on preparing for that? What can we do now? Gary, and I think you were going to take the lead on that one.
Yes, thank you very much, Angela, and welcome everyone. As we worked our way through the FAQs, Angela provided a number of questions and the team had looked at those and we crafted some answers. So we'll be working our way through some material that was prepared for each of those questions. So let's click to the next one. Next slide there, Angela. So one of the first things that we need to understand is that EUDAMED is created with 6 different modules, and you see them coming up, coming from the left-hand side, going to the right, are economic operators, the UDI and device registration module, certificates and notified bodies module, and then the last 3, the clinical investigation, vigilance, and market surveillance. So as manufacturers, you will definitely have touch points with a number of these. First of all, the economic operator, and secondly, good portion of their discussion today would be on the UDI and device registration. That's this particular question. So try to set the context here that it's one of many. Unified body will have a lot of interaction with certificates. Sponsors of any clinical investigations have their dedicated module. There is some manufacturers will also be touching base with that vigilant module for serious incident reporting. And then competent authorities have a lot of interaction with the trend and analysis going on in the market surveillance. So a lot of modules there. For context, there's an interaction between each one of these. And the dream was back early on that all of these modules would roll out and be simultaneously available. That turned out not to be the case. So we have basically a incremental release of various modules. Angela, let's go to the next slide and look at the timeline for the introduction of each of these modules. We'll see that the actor module at the very top row there came out first, made available for voluntary submissions in December of last year, 2020. And just recently, 2 weeks ago, the second and third module, the UDI module and the certificate module, opened up again for voluntary operation, and you can make production entries into those 2 modules in October 4th. The remaining 3 modules, it looks like development is slowed on those, and a number of factors that cause that. We now understand from looking at the rolling plan that the European Commission rolled out that those 3 modules would not be available till the middle or the end rather of 2022. That needs to be followed by an audit where each of the modules are evaluated, and then a very significant event mid 2023. European Commission will announce that EUDAMED is fully functional. That particular event is probably a year later than some of the information that you might see on various websites, including the European Commission. I think that information will be updated, but originally you would see some documentation showing that it is occurring in line with the date of application of the IVDR on May 2022, but we understand that that's going to be roughly a year late. But that's an important event. It starts a 6-month timer. And after that, there are a number of clauses and provisions inside the EUDAMED that need to be are now in effect. One of those things, very importantly, is the mandatory registration of devices. So that 18-month window running from the end of 2023 out to the mid of 2025 is that mandatory period. That is preceded by current voluntary registration that is available. So October 4 up to the beginning of that mandatory period does allow for some voluntary registration. And I'm going to ask John to just kick in a little bit here about some of the experiences of some of our clients engaging the playground and also the production model of EUDAMED. And John, did you want to give a quick report there? How's it look? Is it functional? Is there some things coming that are still outstanding, whatever?
So there is still some outstanding work to be done. I mean, for all of EUDAMED, the rest of the modules are just going to start having playground releases next year. So they'll be continuing development and releasing the code to playground leading up to that end of the year milestone that you have here for having UDAMED fully developed and ready for the audit. From the UDI module perspective, playground and production are in sync today. There's still some issues, and the commission stated that in their last state of play roadmap to expect some additional playground releases even to the UDI module next year. They said, well, none are planned, but it's just I guess the obvious that there needs some improvements there. But even so, when these releases happen, there's a release of the schema package and all the specifications, and it's all encompassing. So even if there was not UDI, technically going to be UDI module updates in Playground, as they're building out the vigilance, clinical investigation, and so forth, and putting those into Playground next year, it's really important to not only test the functionality of those modules, but also continue to test the UDI module to see, was there any impact due to all these interdependencies? So it's, it's definitely still a work in process. And, as you're saying, the commission's not really going to consider themselves done until the end of the year. One thing that was interesting with the launch of the production module was there was actually a release of the module that had features, functionality, a schema for machine-to-machine submission, data dictionary, that was brand new when production hit on, which was October 4th. So the test environment was out of sync with the production environment. It went to production first. Then about a week later, the test environment was updated with that same functionality. Not the traditional SDLC that you follow and everything, but I suppose their reasoning is, we're still in development. It's not fully stable, validated probably until they would consider that until the audit's fulfilled.
Right. Well, all right, very good. So with that background, we understand the rollout of the various modules and the context. Let's go back to that original question. Sorry, we kind of did a little bit of background there to understand where we are. But Sonia, or Angela, you go to the next one. Thank you. There are a number of things that would be recommended in planning for the rollout and conformance to the registration module. We've captured those in 4 different steps. I call them the 4 C's. The first one there is create. So this does take a lot of planning and resource. There's a lot of project management activity going on in that first step. We won't take the time to go into the sub-bullets. Make sure you download the information here, and you can download this and take a look at it afterwards. But then the second major C, the second step along the way, would be to collect that UDI data that eventually has to be submitted. 120 or so attributes need to be included. That's about twice as many as what the FDA collects for their UDI project. So a lot of activity there. There's some other complications in levels of complexity with hierarchies and so on. But collect the data. The third step along the way would be to cleanse that data. So make sure that it does meet all the validation rules and do a analysis of any missing fields. You might have to go to different resources and pull this information all together, but make sure it meets current regulations as defined by the data dictionary put out by the EUDAMED. And then the last step is actually comply. So that particular step focuses in on the actual submission. Obviously, you'll need an account in that EUDAMED module and verify your submissions and maintain that over the course of time. So these are some steps that are available and are recommended to work your way through at each of your individual sites. Now, remember that this is for the UDI and device registration module. I do want to mention that this is a parallel activity with preparation for those other modules. So, Angela, if you click and we'll just highlight some of the very high-level items that the team had talked about, where there's some very high-level critical things, and I'm just going to ask some of the other team members, Mark, if you want to start off with the actor module, talk a little bit about SRN, and then the other two, Aaron, I know that you've been working with notified bodies and some documents, and then let's follow up with Tom. What is the impact of QMS? So all these are parallel activities as you start to prepare for UDI registration module. Okay, Mark, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. The actor registration model can be run since last year. I think the end of last year that it was made available. So it's a good idea to get onto that now. Work out, what your team or the team that are going to be involved in submitting data, how that's organised internally. But you can get on with that right today and get your actor registration sorted out today. So that's something you can do just following this presentation today. Erin, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I would say we have been submitting our technical documentation to our notified body and scheduling our QMS audits. We have been notified proactively by the notified body that they are getting backed up in those reviews, and if that we're going to see any delays in our submission timelines or our planned timelines, that we need to notify them in advance because they are running out of scheduled time. So I would say the sooner things can be done, the better from our experience, as well as any documentation updates that I think Tom is going to talk through.
Yeah, definitely. So my background is product development, but today I get to be the quality police, which is actually kind of fun. So as you've all heard the joke, if it's not documented, you didn't do it. And we work with all types of customers. And, I usually see two things happen here. One, people try to build their processes before even looking at this stuff. And it's just too vague and it's hard to do. So then what they do is they stop and then they wait till the very end and it's too late. They've already done this stuff. They try to backfill this stuff and it doesn't work. So what we always recommend is just build it as you go. This slide right here is actually a pretty good outline for how you start building out your process to do some of this UDI stuff. Instead of having a very general device identification and traceability procedure that then you let your project teams figure it all out, start building it, get the teams involved, see what each person needs to do, and build a work instruction or a process as you go early, and it will help you later on.
All right, very good. I think that's a lot of good hints there. Angela, let's move on to the next question. I know there's a number of them queued up here.
Yeah, key learnings from the US FDA UDI experience that one can use for EU UDI. John, do you want to take the lead on that one?
Sure. So if we go to the next slide, I mean, ultimately, taking advantage of early testing is number one. We were involved with the early pilot with US FDA, and customers were as well, clients of ours that work with us for UDI, and look to follow the same with UDI for UDAMED, because as what we just seen in the previous slides, UDAMED it's not just a UDI initiative, right? It's not like very analogous to, FDA UDI, because it's just one module within UDAMED. It is such a larger program. All the different module components and requirements and things you have to prepare for from a process perspective. And as Gary mentioned earlier, if you're comparing this to the US, the data is over twice the amount of data that has to be collected, sourced, and ultimately submitted into the UDI module. The structure of everything basic UDI came about. That was not existent within for US Good ID. So you actually have two identifiers that you're maintaining here, one more of at like the model level for basic UDI versus the device level having the UDI DI, whereas the US you simply had what would be equivalent to the UDI DI as the primary DI. So there's quite a few differences. I guess the similarity is it's UDI. But it's certainly not a, hey, we did this, we submitted our data to the US, just go submit that data to the EU. There's quite an analysis even that has to be done between Looking at the different data dictionaries, can you submit the same data to the EU that you submitted to the US? Understanding, what the US has within their data dictionary compared to the EU, the definitions, how they want that data, the nomenclature, and all those things. So I'd say, unfortunately, there are quite a few differences, but what we can learn from experience is, you want to take advantage of as early as possible when there's these testing windows. So whether it's the voluntary submission period that we have here for EUDAMED, but then also the playground that they have. You could get access to the playground and leverage that in a way that you could get your systems, processes, procedures in place without maybe going too far and committing data into production at that particular point, now that we have this bit of a runway. Erin, what are your thoughts from, I guess, a manufacturer perspective?
Yeah, so we are working to start gathering this data, leveraging what information we have from the US UDI, knowing that there are some differences in the data sets and data attributes. I think one of our big learnings from FDA was to start early, but also to identify who owns a specific attribute if we're having challenges identifying that data. We do have a lot of master data challenges, just due to how our organization is set up. So understanding what the source of truth is has always been something that's been very important. But knowing that we do have this period of time where it's voluntary, we're trying to use as much of that time as possible to actually start the submission rather than waiting for the mandatory submission timeframe. I think probably the biggest challenge, and I see there's a few questions coming through, is just a full understanding of basic UDI, DI, and how that will work with the submission effort. So kind of setting up our procedures and data collection efforts around that.
Gary, I think we've done a couple of tutorials breaking down the basic UDI, DI concept. We'll be sure to send that along to the audience after.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you do have any questions, those of you that have tackled the way back when we were looking at the good ID registration, the FDA are a regulator. They've got a good technical staff behind them in order to answer your questions. I think they spend a lot of effort in putting together a good help desk there. But the European Commission isn't quite the same kind of organisation. I mean, your technical interfaces with the notified bodies. And we don't quite know how responsive the EU help desk will be to technical questions. So get your questions in early and wait for a response. You may not get a response very quickly. So get your advice in from whoever you get services from. Start early.
Yeah, some of those folks that have to answer some of those questions may be busy developing the vigilance module at the same time. So, yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, to wrap this question up, I just want to reiterate a lot of what John said. There's a common misconception out there that you can just take your procedure for what you're doing on the FDA side, copy, paste, change the heading at the top, and you certainly can't for all the reasons described. I think this is a good time to get a little more strategic. As Erin said, start thinking about what things can I use on both, what things are unique to each. And instead of like having two separate procedures, I've seen people with like spreadsheets that are like treasure maps trying to identify all their traceability and stuff. So take a step back, be a little more strategic, and make sure you merge them together in a process.
Okay. Moving on to the topic of IVDR. Who decides what class a product falls into, and can you self-certify under the IVDR? Mark, I think you were telling a little bit about some recent news here.
Yeah, well, we know that one of the big changes with the IVD regulation is that a load more devices will be captured under the new certification rules. Remembering all the devices need to be registered, but certification has a major change. you need to be sure that the particular class of device which had an interaction with a notified body or third party, you need to get in there early. You might know that we've had some. I think the next slide talks about timescales, but we might know that a lot of the problems with the IVDR is about capacity for testing and evaluation. So that seems to be a real problem. But one thing I'd like to point out is that you've got to be much more careful about specifying the clinical use of your device. That seems to be the big difference between the old directives and the new regulation. And you've got to be much more careful when you're describing the product and its intended use to make sure that you don't flip into a higher class and therefore have more costs than you need. So that's one thing to look for very carefully.
Yeah, and Gary, I think we took the numbers here.
Yeah, working with Mark, he identified some challenges there, and we did just kind of collect some of the metrics to back up that particular set of comments. So if we were to look at the number of IVD counts that are estimated, that is actually going down a little bit. So the bar has been pretty high. Estimate it would be that 22% less IVDs would be on the market. Let's go to the next slide. But that is a little bit deceiving as to the workload. So under the directive, as Mark had mentioned, many of those devices were self-certified, 92%. So that's huge. So the portion in red there mean that a notified body had to provide an assessment is very low, only 8%. But going forward, we see all the way on the right-hand side where notified body involvement, it balloons. It's huge. It's 77%. It's a huge increase in the amount of effort and evaluation that needs to be done. And obviously self-certification goes down accordingly. That I think scared the living daylights out of a lot of manufacturers and notified bodies in being able to react and do all the assessments in time, prepare data, and do the evaluations. Now at the bottom of the screen, we see two more metrics. One, currently, as of today, there are only 6 notified bodies that have been designated, where under the directive there was 22. There's a number of them in the queue to be added, but it's been a slow haul here. There's slow presence of notified bodies being designated. And then the number of significant low certificates have actually been evaluated and assessed and issued at this point in time. So coming off over 1,500 directive certificates, today we only have 31. And we know that it has to go up huge amounts. So just some metrics there for you to have in store that if you are connected with an IVD, this is quite concerning. And I think maybe in the next slide, Angela, let's go there where there's another question where we want to follow this up a little bit more.
Right, about the proposed amendment, the new timelines.
Yeah, these. If you just switch to the next slide, I think we've got some measurements. Yeah. So what's happened, and really only just last week, the Commission came up with a proposal. It's just a proposal. It's got to go to the Parliament in Europe to get final approval. But we had a similar thing when we changed the dates for the MDR recently. So we think it will be approved, but who knows? And so what's happened is the transition between products which were previously approved for the IVD directive. Those certificates will be extended in their validity depending on the type of product. But you do need to have products already which comply with existing directive. And so look at those products that you think are already certified and make sure that you reissue certificates if you can do that before the deadline of May 26, 2022. And then those products can be extended into their into those future dates. But you need to get onto that now and work out which products can benefit from this extension of the transition period.
Yeah, we did capture some of the information there, Mark, in a chart here. Won't spend too much time on it, but basically there's no change to the directive policy there. These are IVD products that have a certificate under directive, and they have this transition period where they can continue to be placed on the market, some criteria there with a valid certificate and so on. But then they're followed by a 1-year sell-off. So no change there. But what did change, as Mark had alluded to, is the legacy IVDs. So, well, excuse me, the first row is for directives products that come off the market. So they place up on the market up to the time of the date of application, and then they're no longer distributed. So that's the first row. The second row is what I was referring to, the legacy IVDs. They have a directive certificate and have a transition period up to 2025, and that's a year longer than before. So this proposed amendment gives another year, and then the sell-off is also moved out. The other noteworthy provision in that amendment is the creation of what I refer to as the first certificate IVDs. And these are IVDs that did not have a certificate under the directive, but they will have, for the first time, a requirement to have a certificate under the IVDR. So these are kind of, if you will, the up-classified devices, and there's a huge amount of these. So the European Commission has built a schedule, and that's the last 3 rows, for high risk D, middle C, and B and A sterile, for those particular devices to be laid out in a scheduled fashion. So that's brand new. So nice schedule there for manufacturers to react. Angela, let's go to the next slide. And if we lay this out on a timeline, what we have at the very bottom is that registration period, but then, excuse me, the items in blue, we won't spend too much time on those, but that's there for your reference for the medical device timing. But the green at the top is specifically for this IVDR question, and you have that legacy period. And then for the actual IVD compliant devices, there's some requirements there that, first of all, the class 1 certified need to be in place by the date of application, and then there's some actually a schedule there for the UDI placement. Now, if we look at the legacy band, the second band down, and if we compare that with where we are today with the current thinking, and Angela, if we jump to the next slide, you'll see the addition of that first certificate row. So this was a schedule that is brand new for those class D, C, B, A sterile, being able to have a transition period, and that will help smooth out this load that we were referring to earlier, in addition to the 1-year addition to the legacy transition period. So I know this is really busy. We'll leave that for your homework to go through that. But I think at this point, maybe if we want to jump to the next question, Angela, thanks.
Yeah. So questions about up classification. Are there some products that have been reclassified to a higher class for EU MDR, and do we have some examples?
Yeah, well, we were, I think all guidance on classification need to look at the Annex 8. That gives you a really tortuous way of going through and trying to work out what these are. Thankfully, the Commission have produced guidance on classification, kind of an easy read, well worth doing. I know there's lots of tools around to help with this as well in terms of describing your product and giving you a solution, so look around for those too. There's not a definitive list. If you're familiar with the old directives, you have to kind of work through the flow chart to find out what's going on there. Overall, we've got some products which weren't devices, which are now kind of coming into the scope. Cleaning devices, some cosmetic implants, We know there's been some issues with the regulation of these types of products, cosmetic, dermal fillers and that kind of thing, which were maybe considered as cosmetic devices. So they've been included, even though strictly speaking, they kind of aren't strictly in the definitions of a medical device. So there's a whole range of products there, and there's a separate annex to cover that. And we've also got some products moving in and out of the different groups there, and absorbed products which have absorbed into the body as well, so they're caught up in that. So yeah, the new MDR is given the Commission an opportunity to introduce tighter requirements in certain areas. So you've got to look at that Annex 8 very carefully. Erin, do you have any particular examples of your products which have been affected by this?
We have not had any up classifications that I'm aware of. I do know that as we're looking beyond the self-certified products, there is that analysis being performed to determine, cost benefit, so cost of compliance versus what we're seeing in terms of sales and revenue, and where it may come that something's up classified and now there's additional testing or compliance requirements. There's discussions happening with the commercial organization.
We here at Greenlight, just ever since the MDR has gotten closer, and actually here, we've had a huge uptick in IVD type companies, and then especially the devices that contain software. I know that is not the most black and white when it comes to regulation. So it seems like more and more software companies are following under these regulations. As Mark said, I do think those rules are very helpful. Like when you think about the FDA side and you have to find predicates and it's not as black and white, it can be challenging. With this, I always tell people just let's pull up these rules, go through it. And for the most part, it's pretty clear to figure out what you need to do.
Okay, great. We'll move on to question 5. Now that the UDI and device registration modules open, will EUDAMED already be populated with existing directive device info? And the second part of that question is if you participate in the voluntary period, does that serve as an official submission, or do you resubmit when EUDAMED production is launched?
Sure, yeah. Well, it would be nice if it was pre-populated with the directive devices, I suppose, but unfortunately, that is not the case. They have to be submitted should a scenario arise that you have to include the directive information in EUDAMED. If you are participating in the voluntary submissions, those are real submissions. This is real live production that we're dealing with. So they do not need to be resubmitted once EUDAMED's fully functional and the other dates kick in and from the slide earlier. It's not to say they don't have to be maintained though once you start entering the devices into the system, because again, now you've loaded it into production, you're on the hook to maintaining it. And just kind of going back to what I was saying earlier about as they continue to build out the modules, right? We really don't know, we don't know yet about how those future modules are going to work, and is there going to be any impact on the device information you submitted? Do you have to make changes based off of something that you run into when they're finishing up vigilance module or something? We don't really know. So something like that could happen. So again, kind of emphasizing the playground as a key tool in your tool set, in your toolbox, where for the next year and a half or so as the development continues, because that's where you're going to see the functionality coming in for the other modules before it hits production. And back as I was mentioning, having the ability to see how does that impact maybe some of your test data that you have in the playground. So there's no connection between playground and production with respect to data. And frankly, they may actually clear out, the commission's kind of stated that the data you have in the playground, there's no guarantee it stays there when they do later deployments. So we've experienced that actually ourselves, where the data got wiped out in playground environment upgrades. but it's still an important tool to leverage to, continuous testing. If you can align with the Commission's state of play roadmap as to when those playground releases are coming. And also, as I mentioned, the latest document that came out from the Medical Device Coordination Group, I think we got it in our hands yesterday from MedTech Europe, had that statement in there where the Commission says, more playground releases next year for UDI. Again, nothing planned, but they're basically saying, like, we don't know what we don't know, but sure we'll be changing things. So if you're already in production, so you have some voluntary submissions you make at the end of this year and you're already in production, you have to stay on top of what changes they're making next year in playground. Unclear, are they going to push that to production after those changes? Are they going to wait until all of UDAMED's done and do a big bang release in preparation for the audit? We don't have these details yet, but it's just something to be aware of and to stay on top of, because you may need to redo some things for data that was entered early. One last thing I want to mention is there is discard functionality that UDAMED had developed, which when records are at a certain state, the Commission has an ability for you to go in and actually discard that record and remove it. So that's something to look into. It's in I believe it would be in the manual that is released with UDAMED, guiding you which type of UDAMED roles and who could do something like that. But that could be an option if a record had to be retrieved. So again, Aaron, I know you touched on it briefly earlier, but what's, again, from a manufacturer's perspective, with all of this, I think what's your approach is to go in and start doing some voluntary in production or perhaps playground as well?
Yeah, I think the sooner we get started, the sooner we'll have a better understanding of some of the maybe intricacies of the data requirements. I know that we had a lot of learnings with FDA where we didn't fully understand a data attribute and we had some system kickbacks. So the sooner that we start, the more that we're feeling we'll be able to learn, so that when we get to the point where it is mandatory, we're not coming up against deadlines in a short period of time in which we have to correct and adjust the data submissions. So it's a start as soon as we can, make sure that we have access to all of the required systems for all of our sites and locations. So that's one thing that we're still in the process of. So sooner rather than later. Yeah,
and I guess it's one ray of light, I suppose, is, with the other modules not being out there yet, they're potentially, it just gives you more of a runway to prepare and to get things ready before everything does go into effect and like, as you said, becomes mandatory.
All right. Moving on to question 6 about legacy and regulation devices. For UDAMED device registration, what is the difference between legacy and regulation devices and their requirements? So Gary, I think you were going to take us through this one. Did we lose Gary?
I had to come off. Yep, sorry, I had to go off mute. Some dogs barking in the background, and didn't think you wanted to hear that. So, so let's define some terms first. Legacy device, the regulation device down at the bottom, and then halfway in between something called an equivalent device. So we'll touch on that. So a legacy device, we've kind of used this term earlier, but it does mean that this particular product has a valid directive certificate, and there's been no significant changes affecting design, safety, or effectiveness on that product. So you can continue to market that particular product. There is a clause in the regulation that says there are some functions for that particular product that you need to conform with the MDR. So the market surveillance, post-market surveillance, vigilance, registration of your operator, and registration of the device itself. So when those modules are available and in place, these particular directive devices need to comply with those, which is interesting because they really are put out on the market underneath the directive. Down at the bottom would be those devices that are, unique model version, but anyway, it's been assessed and conformed to the regulations, so an MDR or an IVDR compliant device. And then halfway in between, there's this reference to something called an equivalent device. So this equivalent device is the same design as your legacy device under the directive, but it's been reevaluated to the MDR, IVDR. So let's go to the next slide. We kind of charted this information out side by side, where we look at a legacy device first. It's your current original design, has all those references to the directives there. But when it is registered, obviously the predicate rule here is that or the prevailing rule is that you register this with the member states. But there is this requirement to register it eventually with EUDAMED, and there's some special identifiers, EUDAMED DI and EUDAMED ID. We unfortunately don't have time to go into that, but be aware that that is to be registered and has some unique identifiers. No requirement for UDI on the actual label, though. If you take that very same device and then have it reevaluated and assessed to the MDR, now you're talking about something called an equivalent device, and we'll see why you might want to do that in a second. So it has similar design, but the regulations are quite different. It's registered with a buddy and a device identifier in EUDAMED UDI module, and it does have UDI requirements for the label. So the MD symbol and making sure that the identifier does comply with UDI. And then the third column refers to a particular device that might be related, but now it's a different design. So it was significant enough change that it's a new model, or it's a new version, or it's a brand new product, but it now needs to comply with MDR and also be registered and so on. So let's go to the next slide, Angela, and see how this might play out over the course of time. In the very first row at the bottom, you see this directive medical device, and that's those group of products that are no longer distributed after the date of application. For whatever business reason, they're just off the market. But the next row up, I just want to highlight your class 1 directive devices. They would have to be self-certified, and that date has already taken place. So back in May of this year, self-certification for those MDR class 1 products would have needed to occur, and that is going forward. Now we talk about this, the top 3 rows here. So we start off with a directive medical device. After the date of application, you're able to continue to market that for a period of time, so that's a legacy device. But it has a cliff. There's an end period of time where that provision is no longer valid. So going out to May of 2024, all those certificates expire, and even though you had a valid certificate for that whole time period, or maybe even more, it's eventually going to expire because of the date in the regulation. Now you have 2 game plans, 2 options to move out of that particular period of time with those products. One is make no design changes and now use that particular device, reevaluate it to the MDR, and now that becomes an MDR equivalent device. Now that's significant in that if there is a serious incident during this mandatory reporting period that we talked about earlier, you can, as a prerequisite for that serious incident, report either the legacy device or the equivalent device. So either one of those would be able to be used in conjunction with your serious incident. Your other pathway is to maybe make use of some of those pent-up design changes that you want to roll out to the public, and then you actually create a new model or version. You have a new device identifier, and now that's an MDR device. It complies to all the MDR regulations and all the different modules and so on, but there's a pathway for your legacy devices. Unfortunately, there's an end period and you eventually have to make a decision as to which way you go. So let me just quickly ask Aaron, do you have any strategy or any devices that would fall into this category? Were you thinking of making use of the equivalent device or go right to the MDR? Maybe just give us a manufacturer's perspective on this?
I don't know that we're doing any equivalency. I would have to check with our regulatory team, but I don't think we're using that as a strategy. I think our transition timing is based on the legacy being available and then transitioning directly to MDR.
Okay, very good. So, Angela, I think we can move on to the next question. This is all very interesting. You kind of have to work it out for your best particular situation, and there's not one straight answer here for everyone, but you know, you kind of have to make it customized. Next question, then.
Yep. Next question is about CE marks. What should I know about existing CE marking and future requirements? Are there any audit concerns? So, Erin, I know you're fresh from an audit. Maybe you can tell us about this topic.
Yeah, so we have had a number of surveillance audits and MDR QMS audits just in the last calendar year. COVID has definitely made this more challenging. Our notified bodies kind of differ on their restrictions for COVID. So in some cases we have had in-person audits, but the majority have been virtual, which bring their own challenges. I think the one thing that we are seeing more of than anything besides just being used to the virtual auditing is the scheduling difficulties that we're having. So we've had a number of audits that have had to be delayed due to schedule availability from the notified body. And knowing that certificates may expire because of some of these delays is the biggest challenge right now. So we are trying to know as much in advance what our scheduled dates are and ensure that we're ready, whether it's for a QMS audit, a technical submission, making sure that everything is on time, because when things are delayed, it's often difficult to get back on schedule.
All right. Good.
If I can just chip in also, you know, you may have been used to working with a notified body previously. That notified body may or may not be available anymore. But even if you do, you know, work with your same notified body, you still have to make sure that their scope of accreditation is still suitable for your range of products. Because remember, all the notified bodies have been reevaluated under the MDR. So they've been kind of rechecked to see that they're competent in all the different areas. And not all notified bodies can cover the full range or scope of the MDR. So you need to check that as well.
All right. And Tom, did you have any comment in this area?
I can confirm both of what Erin and Mark said. We have a lot of clients that come to us and they have these goals for when they want to launch or get a CE marking, and it's hard to hit them because they don't even think about getting these things scheduled. It's common across every industry, companies throughout all countries. So I would definitely plan early and make sure you're aware of that.
Okay. All right, moving on about quality management systems. So Tom, can you kind of take us through some of these, you know, big things to consider to comply with MDR and IVDR?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think sometimes when standards or regulations change, it seems a lot worse than it really is. There aren't as many maybe process changes you need to make. I don't know that that's the case with this one, unfortunately. You want to make sure that you are planning ahead, putting together a team, cross-functional. I think a lot of times people rely on their quality group or their quality and regulatory group, and they don't get the other people involved. And so we'll hit some of the big ones here. There are a lot to go through. The ones that are relevant for today, obviously identification and traceability. I see some people that have very generic procedures for this, and then they just let their design teams go and try to figure out the identification and the different labels, and everything looks a little different. And they also slow down their projects for something that shouldn't be slowing it down. So as Erin said before, I think it's good to get in there and practice things now and start building your procedures, because it's going to save you a lot of time later when you try to figure out how to get this information into the various systems. Post-market surveillance, you know, I personally think from an FDA side, the people that were selling there were doing a lot of this before. You want to look at it because there are new terms and there There may be some more things you need to do for some of your devices as before, but you're going to want to have post-market surveillance plans and the reports. And then for some higher class devices, you need the periodic safety update report. We all know that clinical data is getting more important, so collecting some of that information. So really just make sure you have a good post-market surveillance series of procedures. In some cases, depending on the size of your company, that might be a group itself. And so then the other things, the GSPRs were used to essential requirements in the past. They're new requirements now, that clinical evidence. It's very important you have somebody that owns regulatory compliance, and you want to make sure that you're on track of your suppliers and any other economic operators. So that's the high level. The last thing maybe is to make a procedure for acronyms too. They're kind of hard to keep up with these days, but there's a link down there for all of you that want a little bit more information on that.
Okay, great. Erin, any thoughts on QMS?
I would say that we did start off with a gap assessment against the requirements in the MDR, trying to just understand before we went off and changed a bunch of procedures or created new ones. We did start with a gap assessment for each of our facilities. And even on the technical side, they're doing gap assessments right now. So that was one thing that helped in our preparation and planning, was to complete that gap assessment.
Okay, great. All right, last question about GMDN and EMDN. What are the main differences between these two, and is there any mapping available between these standards? So Mark, I know what you live and breathe. GMDN.
Microphone on, and no one's going to hear. Well, I'm glad we've got another hour to talk about this, because it's my favorite thing. But to really go through this, the EMDN is quite a bit of a different animal to the GMDN. Those of you familiar with submitting data to not just USA, but other countries. I would say the main difference is that, it's a classical classification system. On the slide now, you can see how the data is kind of structured. You will need to find the nomenclature at what's called the terminal level. So here there's an example. We've got the structure for a range of sutures. You'll need to go all the way down so you don't go any further, to those terminal level descriptions to try and work out which one you need. Now, that is a little bit easier said than done, because the EMDN does not have any definitions like you get in GMDN, so there's nothing else to read. That's what you've got to make your assessment. Does this describe my product? They do provide, so what do we do if we don't think our product is one of these terminal terms here? Well, what we need to do is find what we call a higher level term, which is called one of these other groups. So it's kind of a collect all. And I suppose it does help in the fact that if you can't find something specific at a slightly higher level, you'll find something a bit more general, which says other, which is kind of a bucket for all of the stuff which you can't find a specific description for. So that's my kind of guide there if you need to find out. The other thing as well with this system is there's no inquiry system like you get with GMDN. So you can't just send us a message and like you do now and say, well, this term's no good, can you create me a new one for my particular group? You can't do that. They're only looking at updating this data set at least once every year. There's no inquiry service or process in the moment. So if you can't find something which is specific, you're just going to have to pick something a little bit more general. And, do the best you can. We've got some tools on our website to help you, point you in the right direction. If you've got a GMDN account, you'll be able to use your My Terms list to find a kind of an approximate interpretation. It's our interpretation of what the nearest EMDN is for any particular GMDN code. But yeah, that's probably the best way to go there.
Okay, it looks like we're at the top of the hour, and I'm going to turn over the presentation to Sonia to close us out.
Okay, well, thank you very much first to John, Mark, Tom, Aaron, and Angela for that very insightful discussion and fireside discussion, I should say, and presentation. We have come to the end of the webinar. Just a reminder that the team at ReTech will follow up with you after this presentation regarding your questions, and there were a bunch of them in there, so they will get back to you. If you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that are on your screen. There's one for LexisNexis ReTech, MedDevice at retech.com, and Greenlight Guru at Let's Chat at greenlightguru.guru. And then you can please check out the websites for GMDN and Vyaire Medical. Check out their websites to find out more information. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Please participate in that, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. And in a few seconds, I'm going to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view the recording of this event with that link, and also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Gary, John, Mark, Tom, Aaron, and Angela, for that very insightful discussion. So thank you very much, everyone. Great. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your XTalks moderator. On behalf of the team here at XTalks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.